First, I'd like to thank you for all coming. I'd like to thank all the sponsors. Council for Islamic World Affairs at the School of International Public Affairs, or SIPA, the Islamic Law Students Association at the NYU School of Law, and the Muslim Students Association at Columbia University. Also, I'd like to thank the individuals who donated to make this event possible. Dr. Crane, or Dr. Robert Dickson Crane, attended the University of Munich in Germany from 1948 to 49, majoring in sociology of religion, and again in 1955 to 56, majoring in comparative legal systems. He earned his BA from Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois in 1956, summa cum laude, majoring in political science, economic planning, and Sino-Soviet studies. He obtained his JD from Harvard Law School in 1959, specializing in comparative legal systems and international investment. Dr. Crane worked for the next 20 years in and out of government and was one of the 4 co-founders of the Center for Strategic and International Studies in 1962. President Nixon appointed him in January 1969 to be Deputy Director of Planning in the National Security Council. In 1981, President Reagan appointed him as U.S. Ambassador to the United Arab Emirates. He openly embraced Islam in 1981, and for the last 20 years, is a full-time Islamic scholar and activist. He has served as the Director of Legal Division of the American Muslim Council and is the founding president of the Muslim American Bar Association. He is currently the chairman of the Center for Understanding Islam in Bernardsville, New Jersey. Dr. Crane's recent articles are available, and he's published widely. They're most recently available in the journal called The American Muslim at theamericanmuslim.org. Dr. Crane is also a linguist, and he's fluent in English, German, Russian, Spanish, French, and Arabic. And he's perhaps the only person to have escaped the Stalinist Soviet Gulag twice. So inshallah, we'll have about 1 hour lecture and a question and answer session at the end. Also, this lecture, Faruqi Memorial Lecture, inshallah, Dr. Crane will talk more about Ismail Faruqi, but I will say that he was the last governor of Galilee in independent Palestine prior to 1948 and was an inspiration for a generation of Islamic thinkers. I'd like to also thank the Columbia Law School for hosting, providing a place for this event. And finally, on behalf of the Columbia Muslim Students Association, we'd like to thank Dr. Crane for his time and effort and to come here despite a current illness. And so without further ado, Dr. Crane.
And I have a question I'd like to ask. How many have ever read anything that he's written? 4, yeah, about 10%. That's pretty good. How many had never even heard of him until this past month? Well, that's just most people know of him. Well, see, he constitutes a myth. People have never read what he said, basically, but they know about him. You know, Thomas Jefferson is the same way. He's, in my view, the last really authoritative Muslim in America, a Muslim who is accredited with, you know, being beyond critique. There's never been anybody like him before or since. And I experienced that once in 1985. I guess it was 1986. For a year and a half, I spent all the time going around speaking to MSAs around the country. I don't know how many there were. There must have been 100, and I think I spoke at all of them. And there was one old guy who used to follow me around in the East Coast. And he would heckle me and, you know, say haram, you know, kufr, and so forth. And I sort of welcomed it because that gave me an opportunity to explain further what I meant. But he really got obnoxious at Temple University, and Ismail Faruqi was there, Professor Faruqi. And he got up and said, I've known Dr. Crane for a long time, and I've never heard him say anything un-Islamic. And nobody ever dared to question me again. They might not have agreed with him or me, but I was off limits. That's how much authority he had. He did have opponents, and that's part of the history of why he was assassinated in 1986. I moved into his office. He was president of the International Institute of Islamic Thought, and I moved into his office the day after he died. And I was immediately assigned the job of finding out what happened. And I went up to Philadelphia and talked with the police and talked with the FBI and so forth. they completely stonewalled. They didn't want to say anything. And I think I have my own reasons why. But I think another, I don't want to get into that. That's a great conspiracy theory. But he told me about 3 months before he died that some African Americans were very much against his teachings about interfaith work and had threatened his life. And it was an African American who killed him. I don't know if you know that history, that broke into his house and with a long knife and just sliced him up. It took a long time before he finally died. Sliced up his wife, Lamia, too. No, why would anybody want to do that? Because I wanted to read something that he wrote about ecumenism and other religions than Islam. Maybe I have it over here. I think it shows very clearly what his thinking is. Well, I guess I didn't bring it with me. That's too bad. But his view was that all the religions, all the major religions, are paths to God. They're all legitimate in the plan of God. They differ. They're not all equal. But a Jew should be just as respected as a Muslim or a Christian. His religion should be respected just as equally, because diversity is what God planned for the universe. Otherwise, it would be just one standard cloud and one standard tree and one standard color of skin and one standard religion. And it's very clear in the Quran that that is not what Allah intended. So for us to look down on other religions is un-Islamic. Well, some of the people, whether they're Antar al-Islam, whatever the groups are, considered this to be kufr, denial of Islam, and he told me that some people want to kill him because of this. His most recent detractors or enemies are professional Islamophobes. Daniel Pipes is one of them. He's singled out, after 9/11, he singled out Shaheed Ismail Faruqi as one of the three leading, well, actually as the sort of the primeval source of extremism in Islam. And he published an article in the the November 2001 issue of Commentary, which is one of the three leading neocon publications, attacking Pipes and saying that he and his followers intend to take over America and abolish the U.S. Constitution without violence. This is the essence of what it means to be a moderate Islamist. You want to destroy the American Constitution, but without blowing up the country. And he says that most of the organized Muslim community in America, for which Faruqi is the godfather, and I quote him, agrees with the Islamist goal of building an Islamic state in America, unquote. And he says many of the Islamists are covert in their strategy, but Faruqi's organizational means to carry out this strategy, and he's referring to the IIIT, International Institute of Islamic Thought, is very overt. And he quoting him again in this article, he says, it proclaims its academic purpose to be nothing less than, quote, the Islamization of the humanities and social sciences, unquote. Wow, this sounds really evil. And he calls Pipes calls Faruqi, quote, the first contemporary theorist of the United States made Muslim. He's now engaged in a running battle with the American Muslim Online Journal, which I'm one of the 4 co-owners, and I contribute a couple of long articles in almost every issue. This is an interesting publication because all of its editors are Euro-Americans. They're converts to Islam, white converts. They don't particularly want to be that way. It's just the ones who contribute. And this is about as moderate as you can get. But now he's attacking this journal and everybody in it. And he launched his tirade because the logo of the American Muslim is a map of the United States with a calligraphy Bismillah on it. And he said this proves that the editors of the American Muslim want to take over America and destroy the American system of government. So we're going back and forth on this. He also goes even further by lumping Faruqi with those who want to impose an Islamic caliphate on the world. This is something also which has started since 9/11. There's a very interesting book, The Sword of the Prophet, Islam, History, Theology, Impact on the World, by Sergei Trifkovich, 312 pages. And this is an Islamic phobic publication. And he says about Ismail Faruqi and the caliphate, a leading practitioner of taqiyya, that's dissimulation, in pretending that Islam teaches peace, charity, and brotherhood, is Ismail Faruqi, who, and I quote him, was the first contemporary theorist of the Islamic Caliphate of America. He declared in 1983 that nothing could be greater than this youthful, vigorous, and rich continent turning away from its past evil and marching forward under the banner of Allahu Akbar. He may have said that. I don't know whether Ismail Faruqi said that. But if he said it, he had something very different in mind than taking over America. He wanted to bring the wisdom of Islam to join with the traditional wisdom of America's founders to build a better society, to provide moral leadership in the world. It would be useful to explain Ismail Faruqi's ideas on the caliphate. I haven't had time to research it, but I know what he thought. And I've just completed a new book called Shaping a Common Vision for America. And the subject of the caliphate comes up, and whether that is a political concept or more a moral concept. For Ismail Faruqi, it's not a world government. It's the moral consensus of the wise men of Islam. And I'll quote from my book. It's one chapter is on extremism, sources of extremism. Extremism comes when pan-Islamists operationalize a unity of belief in a human community of monist monolithism rather than in a boundless love for all of God's creation in a transcendent Islamic cosmopolis. These are all big words. Extremism comes especially when people substitute a political institution for themselves as the highest instrument and agent of God in the world, when they call for a return of the caliphate in its imperial form embodied in the Ottoman dispensation. It comes when they call for what Shah Wali Allah of India in the 18th century called the Khilafat Zahira, or external, exoteric caliphate, which is the political concept, in place of the Khilafat Batina, or esoteric caliphate, formed by the spiritual heirs of the prophets, who are the sages, saints, and righteous scholars. In the late Abbasid period of classical Islam, the political scientists of the day delegitimized both institutional exclusivism and critically centralization of political power by disallowing the theophanic descent of celestial sovereignty into any human institution. People tell me I should write English. In other words, they denied the ultimate sovereignty claimed by modern states since the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, which ended the 30 Years' War over religion. This watershed in European and world history elevated states to the ultimate level of sovereignty in place of the divine, thereby relegating religion to the periphery of public life or excluding it and with it morality altogether. The late Abbasid scholars, faced with a gradual process of creeping despotism, denied the divine right not only of kings but of every human institution, and they condemned the worship of power and privilege that had brought corruption upon the earth. For insisting on this foundation principle of Islam, which is one of the 7 human rights in Islam, I can discuss it in the question and answer period. Professor Khalid Abu Fadl, in his book Conference of the Books, pointed out that all of the great Islamic scholars were imprisoned. Some of them died in prison for championing this principle of denying absolutism in any political power. It's interesting that even Ibn Hanbal, who is considered to be an arch conservative by some, I don't think he is, but people say he is, Ibn Taymiyyah, completed the process of deconstructing the ontological fatalism of caliphatic thought by restricting the role of the caliphate to what Abu Hamid al-Ghazali had called an ummatic umbrella, functioning only to protect the functional integrity of Islamic law rather than to govern politically. Ibn Taymiyyah asserted that the unity of the Muslim community depended not on any symbolism represented by the caliph, much less on any caliphal political authority, but on, and Ibn Taymiyyah wrote, quote, confessional solidarity of each autonomous entity within an Islamic whole, unquote. In other words, the Muslim Ummah, or global community, is a body of purpose based on worship of God. By contending that the monopoly of coercion that resides in political governance is not philosophically constituted, Ibn Taymiyyah rendered political unification and the entire caliphate redundant. This was the view that Ismail Faruqi had. There are Muslims in the world who, Hizb al-Tahrir, for example, who want a global government under some Muslim caliph that I guess they would represent them. This is a very extreme view among Muslims, and unfortunately some of the Muslim bashers take extremists and say this is what Muslims think. This is one of the reasons why they're attacking Ismail Faruqi, because he used words with a meaning that is not what the extremists use. Then the question is, what is his background? Where did Ismail Faruqi come from? In my view, he was one of the great intellects of the 20th century. How did he come to be what he was? Of course, nobody ever knows. Obviously, Allah wanted him to do that, so he did it. He was born in Jaffa on the Mediterranean in modern-day Israel in 1921 of a well-known family, and at the age of 24 became governor of Galilee. Shortly thereafter, in 1948, after the establishment of Israel as a state, he went to Lebanon and then to America, where he earned a doctorate in American philosophy at Indiana University in Bloomington. He was a philosopher, so when I talk about some of his ideas, they're philosophical, and not everybody can understand philosophical talk. And that's why I think a lot of people respected him so highly, because they couldn't understand what he was saying. But they knew he was saying something profound. He immediately, after he came to the United States, and even before he got his doctorate, he wrote several books. But his best known one, published at McGill in 1967, was Christian Ethics, a Historical and Systematic Analysis of Its Dominant Ideas. He built on this study of Christianity, one of the very few Muslims who has ever studied any other religion. And he built on this to be the leading Muslim ecumenist in the world. Well, maybe Samatu Sheikh Ahmed Kuftarov in Syria is equal to him. But Ismail Faruqi spoke in the Western idiom. He spoke to Western audiences. He was one of the few people who could explain Islam in language that non-Muslims can understand. Maybe the Muslims couldn't understand it. I mean, that's always my problem. The Muslims can't understand me. The non-Muslims seem to have no trouble. It's a matter of mastering the entire culture so that you can express ideas in ways that people can relate to. He was very good at that. And then he went to Al-Azhar for 3 years before returning to teach for the rest of his life at Temple University, where he started his two great interests in life. I mean, while he was there, he started them. One was the Muslim Student Association, MSA. He was sort of the godfather of that, although it started 20 years earlier. He was sort of the intellectual inspiration for it. And the International Institute of Islamic Thought. He was hired to be president of that. So, since the International Institute of Islamic Thought was his baby, I thought I would summarize what it stands for. Because as you may know, the IIIT was rated, what was it, last year? 2 years ago? I guess 2 years ago. Last year, right? And all the computers were confiscated and everybody was accused of being a terrorist and so forth. Because I've been told of Israeli intelligence that it's promoting all kinds of horrible things, including the global caliphate and whatever else Ismail Faruqi supposedly was supporting. Jamal Barzinji just wrote this up this month, sort of a summary of the IIIT, what it is, what it stands for a new book on this and other subjects. Well, a new book on the state of Islam in America. And I'm been asked to write a foreword to it. Its purpose was to expand an intellectual endeavor to open up channels of dialogue between Islam and the West. And it attempted to present a centrist perspective about Islam, far from fanaticism or extremism, far from everything that the U.S. government thinks it is. It played a leading role over the past 20 years in promoting a viable Islam for a quarter century after it started in 1980. The core people who put together the IIIT came from the Muslim Student Association. This was probably his major interest in life. And they started out of their youthful zest in the 1960s. They were going to revive a dying Islam, bring religion back to a secularized world, and do this by means of reviving the intellectual heritage, not only reviving the intellectual heritage of Islam, but producing a new intellectual movement. And it's held, numerous professional associations, meetings, and scientific symposia dedicated to an intellectual reformation that would extend to all corners of the earth. Ismail Faruqi thought in terms of civilization. This has been popular since, not Bernard Lewis, Samuel Huntington wrote an article on the clash of civilizations. Ismail Faruqi has always emphasized civilizational change. That's the highest level of human self-identification, and that's where real change occurs. And so Samuel Huntington was right to that extent. But, well, even Samuel Huntington did not say there is an inevitable clash of civilizations. The extremists interpreted him to say that and build on his ideas to develop this clash, which is very basic to the neoconservatives. So the development of the Institute, according to Dr. Barzinji, was a natural step in the evolutionary process of the Islamic movement's leadership. The purpose of the MSA was to develop leaders. And the leaders of the Institute are all former leaders of the MSA. They grew and developed within it. They met each other in the United States and began reviewing the essence of the movement and evaluating the best ways to realize its goals, generally within the last 25 years. I mean, that's when the intellectual part really blossomed. This envisaged institute would have to be independent in performance and in resources, not because of any political or partisan agenda, but because intellectual independence is necessary for its integrity and to protect it from political and partisan currents. Okay. This core group went to the Muslim world. People talk about the Islamic world, so does Jamal Barzinji. I talk about the Muslim world. I don't think there is an Islamic world. There is a Muslim world. To secure the necessary finances to put together such an institute. And they got some funding from the Al-Raji banking family, which funded a real estate investment corporation called the SAR Foundation. It's interesting that nowadays you see the horrible things that the SAR Foundation did, all the money it took, and they say it received $1.5 billion from foreign sources and therefore is disloyal. Actually, that received a lot more than that. In 1982, one of my best friends, who was Undersecretary of State for Economic Affairs, called me and he said, "What is going on? We just have information that something called the SAR Foundation received $5 billion yesterday from Saudi Arabia. What the heck is this?" And so I told him what it was, and don't worry about it. It founded the IIIT, International Institute of Islamic Thought, in order to get tax exemption. I think the law still holds if a corporation gives 5% of its profits, I think it's not income, profits, to a charitable 501c3 organization, it itself can be considered non-profit. Something like that, I've forgotten. But this was the role of the IIIT. It was not designed to influence America at all. As a matter of fact, once the leaders of the IIIT and I went to the Middle East Institute, which is formed by former American ambassadors and is considered to be more an agent of the oil industry than anything else. They called us and they wanted to help us bring knowledge of Islam to the United States. And all the leaders of the IIIT said, "We're not interested in that. We're interested in reviving Islamic thought among Muslims because Muslims are part of the problem of the world." It wasn't interested in taking over the United States. I thought it should be more outgoing, activist in influencing thought in America, but that was not its purpose. So there was an initial conclave of these leaders at Lugano, Switzerland, arranged by the long-established, this is 1977, Cultural Committee of the Muslim Students Association. This is an interesting organization which is covert for, until about 5 years ago. It was responsible for initiating all the national Muslim organizations in America, ISNA, ICNA, AMA, they all came out of this. And when the Cultural Committee changed its name to Muslim American Society about 4 years ago, in its first editorial, which I edited without even knowing what it was, they acknowledged this and said after a long debate they decided to come out into the open. So this Cultural Committee came up with the idea of the IIIT as one of the many Islamist organizations or Muslim Brotherhood organizations in the United States. People think the Muslim Brotherhood by definition is bad, so when I call all these organizations offshoots of the Muslim Brotherhood, I do it not in a derogatory sense. There are some extremist Muslim brothers and there are some non-extremists. The IIIT is about as non-extreme as you could get. So they registered it in Herndon, Virginia in November 1980. And I was hired then later as Director of Publications. So I know the whole history of it. The prospectus and projection was encapsulated in what they called the Islamiyat al-Ma'rifat, the Islamization of knowledge. I've always had difficulties with that term because I think knowledge is knowledge. There isn't such a thing as false knowledge. You can't Islamize something that is. Islamization of thought is needed. Islamization of knowledge can't be done. But this is a matter of semantics. The fundamental purpose of the IIIT and of the Islamization of knowledge, so-called, was to articulate a worldview that explains in a rational way the validity of an Islamic order decreed by God to man as the last testament of an orderly individual and social system. The attempts to construct such a vision were represented by the Institute's programs, activities, and research hubs, and they're quite extensive all over the world. These broke down into 5 goals. First is to construct an Islamic paradigm and an Islamic methodology that would eventually operate the Islamic system to address and adjust contemporary social and behavioral sciences and generate pertinent new information. I think it was Thomas Kuhn in 1969 who first used the word paradigm, a framework of thought with which everything has to be compared in order to be meaningful. And so they used the concept back then, 20 years ago, of an Islamic paradigm and a methodology to both to explain it and carry it out. Second goal was to develop a methodology for interaction with the basic Islamic sources and references, the Quran and the Hadith, so that divine revelation becomes practicable in the world. And I've done a lot of writing on that. Third one is to develop a methodology capable of engulfing and interacting with both the Islamic and human, I've edited this and it's hard to read my editing, a humanly devised heritage. In other words, both revelation and rational thought developed by humans. It's the distinction between haq al-yaqeen and ayn al-yaqeen, ilm al-yaqeen, different forms of knowledge. The fourth is to devise a methodology capable of shedding light on the current affairs of the Muslims and the contemporary world in order to address issues and attendant civilizational challenges and opportunities in the light of Islamic wisdom. The objective is not to impose Islamic power, but to bring Islamic wisdom to bear in the global village and in governments and think tanks around the world. And finally, to detail an educational system of guidelines capable of applying the Islamic paradigm of thought in civilizational renewal. Another grand project at Ismail Faruqi, probably his grandest, which was never fulfilled, was to develop an Islamic university, or a Muslim university, perhaps modeled after Cambridge and Oxford. It would teach all of the modern disciplines. It would cost $100 million before it could open the doors for its first freshman class. It would cost $1 billion before it could open its first graduate school. It would have many graduate schools. This was his great dream. A large number of the faculty, probably a third or more, and certainly a large number of the students would not be Muslims. If you're trying to attract the best students and the best faculty, you have to have people from everywhere. It's a real university in the universal sense, not a madrasa. Unfortunately, the GSIS, Graduate School of Islamic Social Sciences, which grew out of the IIIT, is a madrasa. It wasn't intended to be, but that's what it's become. It just teaches the basics of Islam to Muslims. It doesn't expand human knowledge. People like to talk about it, but it's nowhere near that level. This also was raided, incidentally. And Sheikh Taha Jabir al-Wani was arrested. Well, they broke into his home, he and his wife, Muna, and she had not a nervous breakdown. She was so upset she left for Egypt and never came back. I think she's back now, actually, after it took almost 2 years. It was just such a shock that such an outstanding scholar and a moderate scholar, Sheikh Taha, would be treated that way. His great problem is that Muslims accuse him of being too liberal. You can't have it. You can't have it both ways. You can't be too conservative and too liberal. But that's his problem. My problem too. Let's see. What time is it? I better go. I just wanted to give you some examples of his reading and writing, of his writing. He's a philosopher, so it may be difficult to clearly understand what he's saying. I recall. Yeah, here's the thing I wanted to read about his view on religious dialogue. I forgot where it was. It's in here. This is one of several policy papers I published 4 years ago, back when I had money, for the Islamic Institute for Strategic Studies. The guy who funded it died after 3 months, and we got a lot of these things out, but that was all. So I'm quoting Ismail Faruqi in Religious Dialogue. We, the adherents of the Abrahamic faiths, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, are neighbors so interdependent that our livelihood, our prosperity, our happiness, and security are extremely difficult, if not impossible, without mutual cooperation. This truth is for us self-evident. To deny it on the level of theory may be considered academically, but it does not interest us. For any of the three communities to deny it on the level of action is certain to lead to disaster for all. Understanding the other faith is a conditio sine qua non of recognition of that faith and cooperation with it. Upon it depends the movement of the mind to drop previous prejudices about the other faith and stereotyped images of its adherents. Elimination of bias, in turn, is a requisite to perception of the other faith as de jure, I guess all the lawyers here know what that means, as a legitimate way of relating to God, and these are necessary conditions for the movement of the heart toward appreciation of and willingness to cooperate with the other faith community. Islam holds the Jews to be absolutely equal to its own adherents, the Muslims, all being the creatures of one and the same God. It holds them all absolutely equal in their creatureliness or their natural human figurization by God. This absolute equality extends to and covers their relationship to God and the totality of creation, namely the carrying of the amana or cosmic trust, the khilafah or vice regency of God, and the taklif or standing under the law of God, and the individual mas'uliyah or ultimate personal responsibility in the day of judgment, and their absolutely equal entitlement to God's mercy, which encompasses all. Islam's definition of man, therefore, is the same for all humans. Islam does indeed call the Jews to itself, but in doing so it does not seek to convert them from their faith, which it holds to be from God and hence true. Rather, it seeks two goals. First, to convince them that the Prophet Muhammad believed in and advocated their faith, and that the Quran is a restatement or crystallization of that same faith. To say that he's anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish is absolutely absurd, but this is what he's being accused of, and so are a lot of other Muslims, unfortunately. So I wanted to read, this has two of his two major works. One is Meta-Religion, a framework for Islamic moral theology. This is about 60 pages, and only a professional philosopher, I'm afraid, can understand that. But something that is easier to understand, but also difficult, is an article, First Principles in Axiology and in the Islamization of Thought. Axiology is moral. I mean, ontology is the science of being, epistemology is the science of knowledge, axiology is the science of right and wrong. I found this in his desk after he died. It had never been published. And I tried to get people to IIIT to publish it, and they didn't want to. So after about 3 or 4, well, how many years? 15 years. I finally got his daughter to give authority. She was the only one who had authority anyway. So this is published here for the first and only time in this. I was going to bring a bunch of these with me, and they're all packed, because inshallah I'll be leaving for Egypt soon. There's no funding for Muslim intellectuals in America, so I have to go to Egypt, where now there seems to be more freedom than there is in the United States. Very ironic. And Ismail Faruqi says, the great task facing Muslim intellectuals and leaders is to recast the whole legacy of human knowledge from the standpoint of Islam. The vision of Islam would not be a vision unless it is a vision of something, namely life, reality, and the world. That vision is the object of study of various disciplines. To recast knowledge as Islam relates to it is to Islamize it. In other words, to redefine and reorder the parameters and the data, to rethink the reasoning and interrelationships of the data, to reevaluate the conclusions, to reproject the goals, and to do so in such a way as to make the reconstituted disciplines enrich the vision and serve the cause of Islam. The reason I want to go over to Egypt to spend 5 years is writing a 5-volume magnum opus, is to do this same thing for both America and Islam. Because if we bring out the best of America's founding principles and the best of Islamic principles, we have the same thing. But in order to demonstrate that in a scholarly way would take 5 years. So he's doing it for Islam. I want to do it for America and show that it's the same as for Islam. And then continuing what he says, to this end, to develop an Islamic vision for the world, life, reality, and the world. To this end, the methodological categories or methodologically relevant principles of Islam, namely the unity of truth, the unity of knowledge, the unity of humanity, the unity of life, the telic, in other words, purposeful character of creation, and the subservience of creation to man and man to Allah, must replace the Western categories and determine the perception and ordering of reality. These are not Western, I mean, you don't have to replace Western categories. These are Western categories. If we go back to the founding of America, there's a whole movement that, I don't want to go into that, but starting the glorious revolution of 1688 in England, which gave birth to the Whig movement. Throughout the 18th century, it was a minority in Parliament, but all its ideas went to America. The Americans said, we can't implement these ideas because the British Parliament won't let us. We're going to declare independence and do it in America, which killed the movement in England. It survived in America, but my view is that even this is gradually going the way of good ideas in the growth of civilizations. They rise and then they fall, and I think we're in the process of the inspirational ideas of the American Revolution falling. Perhaps, inshallah, they can be revived. But if they're going to be revived, it's going to have to be together with the revival of the classical thought of the Islamic civilization. Where are we? Let's see. These are the five, and these five unities are what this whole talk here is about. I'll go through a couple of them.
You have 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't. If I have 5 minutes, I won't even start, because he's very articulate. He writes for professional philosophers, unfortunately. He writes for professors, not even for graduate students, which means that his thought has to be translated into ordinary language. So does mine. We have the same problems, but I'm not going to do it. He didn't do it. I'll let somebody else do it if they have the time. I just want to add one thing finally, that in light of my view that reviving his basic unities is the same as reviving the principles of America's founders. Looking at vision and looking at a paradigm of thought is very important. The American founders always talked about justice. And justice always came from a higher source. It wasn't invented by man. I mean, Locke said that rightness and truth comes because man says it's true. He was not the principal intellectual framer of American thought. Hume was, but more importantly, the classical teachings of Christianity, going back to St. Thomas Aquinas, and from him to Muslim philosophers, theologians, that's what really formed American thought. Unfortunately, the greatest product of the human mind in history, I think, was developed over a course of many centuries by the Islamic scholars in the form of the Sharia, Islamic law. But it wasn't the ahkam, the rules and regulations, and do that, don't do that. It was principles by which one can decide how to apply the rules and regulations. Because if you don't have principles to apply them, you can end up with a lot of absurdities. For example, and a lot of examples, the Quran talks about lashing for adultery. Nowhere in there does it talk about stoning. That comes from a hadith, and who knows where the hadith comes from, but it's sort of accepted now you should stone women who are adulterers. This is not classical Islamic thought. This is something that came later. And if you know the principles of Islamic law, you can tell, using your brain, what is genuinely Quranic and what isn't. I'll just mention them. There are 7. I could spend a couple of hours talking about this. I should preface this by saying that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to gather the Sahaba together and give them cases, like the case studies in law school. Ask them, how would you decide? And one would say this and one would say that, and he said, I'm really not interested in your conclusions. I want to know how you got there. What principles did you use? And Ali radiallahu anhu excelled among all the others. And this process, approach was followed by all the great scholars. Shafi used that. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali codified it into 5, and people who follow taqlid say there are only 5. But the greatest scholars, al-Shatibi is the greatest of them all, and the last of the great classical Islamic scholars, he said, since it's a product of the human mind anyway, based on the sources, the Quran and the Hadith, you can't say there's any set number. There could be 7, 8, and at this, these are the major principles. The second level, the Hajiyat, there can be any number. It's flexible, because if you are using your mind and you're not flexible, you're not using your mind. So the first one, incidentally, these have been dead for 600 years. Just now they're beginning to be revived. You know, I've talked with scholars who, you know, they've finished Al-Azhar and so forth, they've never heard of them, but they're now being revived. First one is Haq ad-Din, which is these are duties. They're human rights, but they're duties, because there are no human rights unless people fulfill their duties. Responsibilities come first. Human rights are a result. So the first one is the duty to respect revelation. If one assumes that the human mind is ultimate and needs no guidance from God, well then we're in trouble. And furthermore, God would not be merciful if he would leave humans with all of their prejudices and so forth to determine what truth is. This is the first principle, and all the others flow from that. The second one is Haq al-Haya, or Haq al-Nafs, or Haq al-Haya, the duty to respect the individual human being, which is translated into the right for life. If you to respect that gives other people the right to life. And of course, here's where martyrdom operations would come in. You know, you can apply it in many different ways, but you have to start with a basic right to life. The second one is Haq al-Nasl, which is the duty to respect the nuclear family and community at every level. It has legal rights. In international laws, I studied it at Harvard, only individuals have rights, and even that's rather new, and states have rights. Communities have no rights. In Islamic international law, which was very advanced before Vittorio and Suarez supposedly invented Western international law, a nation, well, a community, it could be at the level of a nation, or of a whole civilization, has legal rights, human rights. And the third one is Haq al-Mal, which is the duty to respect private property. I've done a lot of reading and writing on this. If individual ownership of the means of production is a universal human right, then it must be universal. All the institutions of society must serve to broaden access to capital ownership. Right now, all the institutions of society concentrate wealth. They have to be reformed, not replaced, eliminated. They have to be reformed to reverse the process. So the creation of new wealth would be owned more and more broadly by everybody. And for example, the oil in Iraq should be owned individually by every Iraqi citizen. Voting stock ownership. Somehow I don't think that the oil companies in the United States are going to like that, but that would be, I would say, an Islamic solution. Then they see the next one, the last three I consider to be, I call them qualities, quality of life, maqasid. These are called maqasid, from maqsood, purpose. The next purpose of Islamic law is Haq al-Hurriya, which is the duty to respect self-determination, individual self-determination, self-determination of each level of community. This is political freedom. That's what it amounts to. And within each of these, there's a secondary level. I won't go into that, but you'd have to have a parliament. Everything which people in the West call representative government, not democracy, but representative government, a republic, are essential for Haq al-Hurriya. See, the next one is Haq al-Karama, which is the duty to respect human dignity. It's interesting, here is where freedom of religion comes in. Freedom is not an ultimate goal in itself. freedom is a means to pursue all the other goals and to protect and achieve all the rights. And one of the secondary goals under Haqq al-Karama, duty to respect dignity, is gender equity, which was always very important in early Islam, but the Jahiliyyah, the ignorant culture, took over fairly soon thereafter. When I was at the American Muslim Council, I was head of the legal division. The New York State Prison Director asked me whether women may hold office in public organizations. Apparently they wanted to elect a representative of the Muslims and wanted to elect a woman, and some said it can't be done. So he asked me, and I said, well, I'm not qualified to give a fatwa, but I'll ask Jafar Sheikh Idris, who I'm sure you know, who is very knowledgeable. He's also paid by the Saudis. And so I said, can you give me a fatwa on this? He smiled and he said, well, you realize why I can't. Namely, he was paid by the Saudis. But let me tell you for your own knowledge, the reason this is controversial is because there are practically no hadith on the subject. It wasn't even an issue. I mean, women held every conceivable office. At one point, there were 2,000 women Muslim judges. At that time, there's not one in the entire world. Now there are two, I understand, one in Nigeria, one in Indonesia. Gender equity was just assumed. And now it's very controversial simply because the era of ignorance has drowned a lot of Muslim thinking over the centuries. We have to get back to the original teachings and back to the teachings of the great scholars, which have been, they're not translated. To the extent they're read, people read over their emphasis on human rights. They developed a code of human rights that has never even been approached in human history. As I say, it's basically dead now, but it can be revived. And when it's revived, we'll find that it's exactly what the founders of America had in mind. Americans have to recover, we have to recover our American heritage, and the Muslims have to recover the classical Islamic heritage. And if that can be done, the problems of the world at least can be effectively addressed. There will always be problems, but at least there's hope. Unless that's done, as a professional forecaster of the future of the world, I don't have much hope. So we have a big task ahead of us. Muslims are only one of the forces that are needed. Everybody has to work together. And this is where the ecumenical work of Ismail Faruqi is so important, because he says there's no hope unless the people of all the religions work together. So that's all I can say in 1 hour. 1 minute less.
It was interesting, if I may, it was interesting you said about the respect for private property.
It's very clear in the Quran and various places, and in the Hadith. There's even one Abu Dhar, Sahaba. People call him a communist. He said that even the dress of a person who employs other people should be the same as the employees.
But I was saying it was interesting because in the more modern Western context, there's been a conflict between, for want of a better term, various interpretations of capitalism and vis-a-vis a Marxian analysis. Notion of private property, one could be to protect the private property of those that have against those who might want to have what he has. That would be one set of rationales or something for that. The other would be the basis for some sort of a democratization of private property, capital, asset ownership in the world, which, as you said, is an afterthought almost, that all of our institutions are concentrating.
Right.
Particularly in the era where technology is being displacing labor, perhaps. Lord Payne said there are going to be massive technological displacement of labor.
One of the problems of Muslim economists during the 50s and 60s was that they wanted justice, and the only way they thought they could have justice was to be Marxist. And so many of the Muslim, probably most of the Muslim economists studied in the Soviet Union. They couldn't conceive that capitalism could be a good system if it were reformed. Capitalism, actually, I never use the word capitalism, was invented by Karl Marx to define a selfish, greedy economic system that exploited labor. so I never use the word capitalism. But the growth of capital as the producer of wealth over the last, particularly the last 150, 200 years, completely outdates Marxist view that labor is the major source of wealth. At one point, if you wanted to increase agricultural productivity by 40 times, and the rake was the way to produce wealth, you had to have 40 rakes. Now you have one tractor. The 39 other people are unemployed.
Robot driven.
Yeah. So unless the access to the ownership of wealth is broadened, the unemployment rate will grow exponentially. People blame, I mean, I'm a loyal opponent of the Republican Party. I'm a Republican, but I'm a loyal opponent. The Democrats are attacking Bush because jobs have gone down. They've gone down not so much because of world trade and so forth. They've gone down because they've gone down in every country in the world. It's going to pick up. China has a huge unemployment problem. And this is part of the change in the relative role of capital, in other words, physical tools and human labor. The wealth gap, I have a whole article giving details of the wealth gap in America, which is absolutely unbelievable. We're so rich that even the poor are doing fairly well, most of them. But around the world, it's getting worse. People, not only individuals are getting poorer and poorer, entire countries are getting poorer. And this is going to get worse and worse unless the real causes are addressed. Now the people at Davos and other big conferences know that we're in serious trouble. And you know, misery around the world is unbelievable. It's going to, particularly if part of the world is rich and part is not, people are going to be alienated. When they lose hope, they're going to become extremists, they'll become violent, and we'll have terrorism until there's no civilization left. So I think this question about haq al-mal, the universal right to own wealth-producing property, is very key. The Muslims, and the first approach you said is to defend property so that the people who have wealth won't have it stolen. This, I think, motivates a lot of people in the United States. The rich just want to stay rich. And of course, they have all kinds of nice theories about that. This is not the motivation. They're afraid of envy. Socialism is based on envy. And they know this can be powerful and cause, even here, it could cause a revolution. But that's not the motivation of Islam.